In this video, I'm about to show you 25 yogurt brands you must avoid and exactly why, along with 10 clean, high-quality options you should get instead. Starting with number 25, Müller. Müller yogurts look harmless, with creamy texture, bright packaging, and familiar branding. But once you break down how they're actually produced, they stop resembling traditional yogurt altogether. Most Müller products are built on reconstituted skimmed milk, not whole milk. Fat is removed early, then replaced with modified starches, milk proteins, and stabilizer systems to recreate thickness artificially. Real yogurt doesn't need engineering to exist. Sugar is where the product quietly collapses. Many Müller pots contain 12 to 15 grams of free sugars, much of it from fruit preparations that are heat-treated, concentrated, and enzymatically broken down. That process destroys fiber and buffering compounds, leaving fast-absorbing sugar that spikes glucose while suppressing probiotic activity. Then there's post-fermentation blending. Müller yogurts are often fermented first, then aggressively mixed for uniform texture. That mechanical shear damages bacterial cell walls, reducing live culture viability long before expiry. Independent testing shows viable counts can fall sharply near the end of shelf life. Packaging worsens the issue. Thin plastic cups allow oxygen ingress, accelerating bacterial die-off and oxidizing milk components, which is the reason some pots develop a faint cardboard sweet aftertaste. Number 24. Activia. Activia sells itself as gut health in a pot, but the science behind the product doesn't live up to the branding. Most Activia lines are low-fat or fat-free, which immediately undermines probiotic effectiveness. Dietary fat slows gastric emptying and helps bacteria survive stomach acid. Strip it out, and bacterial survival drops sharply. Activia relies heavily on added sugars, glucose syrups, and flavor systems to compensate for the missing fat. That sugar load doesn't just cancel benefits, it actively destabilizes gut balance in people already prone to bloating or IBS-type symptoms. The flagship culture, Bifidobacterium, is also oxygen sensitive. Activia is mass-produced, transported, warmed, and stored for long periods. During that time, oxygen exposure and pH drift steadily reduce viable CFU counts. By late shelf life, the probiotic dose can be far lower than consumers expect. There's also post-fermentation processing, which breaks up bacterial clusters and weakens survivability. What remains is a yogurt-style product that tastes smooth but functions inconsistently. Number 23. Actimel. Actimel isn't really yogurt. It's a sweetened, fermented dairy drink, marketed as immune support. That distinction matters. It's made from reconstituted, skimmed milk, fermented rapidly, then heavily sweetened to mask its thin body. Sugar levels often rival flavored milk, not yogurt. Because Actimel is liquid, it passes through the stomach much faster, giving bacteria less time to survive gastric acid. Thickness matters in fermentation, and Actimel doesn't have it. Storage makes things worse. Actimel bottles are commonly transported and stored outside strict cold control, and the thin plastic packaging allows high oxygen permeability. Oxygen is lethal to many probiotic strains, accelerating die-off long before consumption. Another overlooked issue is heat exposure. Small bottles warm quickly during transport, and repeated temperature cycling destabilizes both cultures and flavor compounds. That's why Actimel often tastes overly sweet, with a faint chemical finish near expiry. What you're left with is a convenient dairy shot that markets immunity but delivers inconsistent probiotic value. It's functional branding, not functional nutrition. Number 22. Yoplait. Yoplait looks like classic yogurt, but once you break down how it's actually made, it becomes clear why it behaves more like a sweetened dairy product than a fermented food. Most Yoplait lines start with skimmed milk, which removes the fat that naturally stabilizes yogurt structure. That thickness is then rebuilt using modified starches, milk solids, and texture agents, a shortcut that creates body without fermentation depth. The sugar load is the next failure point. Many Yoplait pots contain double-digit grams of added sugar, much of it from fruit preparations that have been heat processed and concentrated. That process destroys fiber and buffering compounds, leaving fast-absorbing sugars that overwhelm any probiotic benefit. Fermentation itself is tightly controlled for speed, not quality. Yoplait is fermented quickly, then post-processed and blended, which reduces bacterial resilience and shortens functional shelf life. By late expiry, live culture activity is often minimal. Packaging doesn't help. Thin plastic cups allow oxygen exposure, accelerating flavor, flattening, and bacterial die-off. What starts creamy ends up sweet, dull, and nutritionally hollow. Number 21. Frubes. Frubes look like a harmless little yogurt snack, especially to parents. But pick up a tube and think about it for a second. 12 to 14 grams of sugar in one squeeze. That's not breakfast. That's biscuit-level sugar. And the real problem isn't just how much, it's how fast it hits. Frubes aren't eaten, they're swallowed. Kids squeeze and gulp them down, which means the sugar goes straight into the system with no slowdown. That's why parents often notice a sudden burst of energy followed by a crash and assume it's just kids being kids. It isn't. Liquid-style snacks always absorb faster than solid yogurt. The texture tells the same story. It's engineered to be ultra-smooth, so it flows through a tube, which usually means heavy processing after fermentation. The result is something that tastes sweet and easy, but delivers very little of the gut benefit people expect from yogurt. Then there's the packaging. Soft plastic tubes react quickly to heat and storage conditions, which is why so many people say Frubes taste oddly sweet or off near expiry. Frubes aren't dangerous, but they're less yogurt, more sugar delivery system. And they quietly teach kids that yogurt is something you drink, not food you eat. Number 20. Petits Filus. Petits Filus feels trustworthy. Small pot, creamy texture, calm branding, it looks like proper yogurt. The problem doesn't show up immediately, it shows up over time. To guarantee safety and uniformity, the milk base goes through high heat treatment. When the product is fresh, everything seems fine. But as weeks pass, the structure slowly breaks down. The creaminess fades, the body thins, and the flavor flattens. That's why so many people notice that Petits Filus tastes dull or slightly watery as it gets closer to its date. To hold the product together, sweetness and milk solids do a lot of the work. One small pot can contain 10 to 11 grams of sugar, which keeps it tasting pleasant even as the structure weakens. Fermentation happens, but the yogurt benefit people expect isn't consistent across shelf life. Packaging doesn't help either. Small plastic pots don't protect the product from air and light as well as people assume, so flavor quietly fades even when the yogurt is still in date. Number 19. Nestlé Ski. Nestlé Ski feels like one of those yogurts people buy out of habit. It's been around forever. It tastes familiar, and that's exactly why nobody questions it anymore. But once you slow down and actually eat it, you realize how little of it behaves like real yogurt. The texture is the first giveaway. Ski is unusually smooth and uniform, almost mousse-like, which usually means the structure isn't coming from fermentation alone. To get that consistency, the milk base is heavily processed and stabilized, then sweetened enough to keep the flavor predictable. Many ski pots land around 11 to 13 grams of sugar, which quietly turns what should be a simple dairy food into a dessert-leaning snack. The flavor profile also fades fast. the first few spoonfuls taste fine. Then it drops into something flat and overly sweet, a common sign of yogurt built to be shelf-stable rather than alive. People often describe skyr as filling but unsatisfying, which fits a product designed more around texture control than fermentation depth. Skyr isn't unsafe. It's just old-school, mass-market yogurt, optimized for consistency and nostalgia, not quality or gut benefit. Number 18. Onken. Onken sells itself as the more natural, thoughtful yogurt option, and on the surface, it looks better than most. The issue isn't what's added, it's what's taken away. Onken yogurts are typically very low in fat, which gives them that clean, sharp tang. But fat is what carries flavor and slows digestion. Remove too much of it, and you end up with a yogurt that tastes aggressively sour at first, then oddly hollow after a few bites. That's why many people add honey, fruit, or sugar to onken without even thinking about it. Some flavored onken pots still end up around 9 to 12 grams of sugar, which doesn't sound extreme until you remember the portion sizes are small. The acidity also makes the yogurt feel harsh on an empty stomach for some people, something customers have quietly complained about for years. Texture-wise, onken can feel thin or grainy depending on the batch, a sign that the balance between fermentation and milk solids isn't always stable. It's marketed as pure and natural, but the eating experience doesn't always match that promise. Number 17. Nomadic yogurt. Nomadic yogurt looks premium, modern, and Instagram-friendly, clean pots, soft colors, natural vibes. But once you actually taste it, the cracks show quickly. The yogurt itself is mild to the point of being forgettable. The texture is smooth but light, almost whipped, which usually means the fermentation is gentle and the body is supported by processing rather than depth. That's why the flavor doesn't develop much as you eat it. It stays soft, sweet, and slightly empty. Nomadic leans heavily on flavor additions to carry the product. Even the fruit versions taste more like blended puree than yogurt, and sugar levels can creep into the 10 to 12 gram range without delivering any real richness. It feels designed to be inoffensive rather than satisfying. There's also a freshness issue. Nomadic yogurts tend to taste best right after purchase and noticeably dull just a short time later. That drop-off is something people often notice but can't quite explain. A sign of a yogurt built for branding and shelf appearance rather than resilience. Number 16. The Collective. The Collective yogurts look premium, feel indulgent, and charge accordingly, but once you look past the playful branding, the product doesn't fully earn that image. The biggest issue is how much sweetness is doing the heavy lifting. Even in flavors marketed as grown-up or natural, the sugar content creeps up quickly, masking what should be a clean dairy base. That sweetness smooths over inconsistencies in milk quality and fermentation depth, giving you a yogurt that tastes rich but lacks real character underneath. Texture is another giveaway. It's extremely uniform, almost whipped, which usually means stabilization and processing are tightly controlled to maintain shelf consistency. That's not inherently unsafe, but it does mean you're eating something engineered to feel luxurious rather than fermented slowly for depth. For a brand that positions itself as crafted and bold, the yogurt feels more like a dessert pretending to be cultured dairy. You're paying for personality and packaging more than genuine fermentation quality. Number 15. Weight Watchers yogurt. Weight Watchers yogurt sells itself on control, low calories, low fat, a guilt-free eating, but that control often comes at the expense of how yogurt should actually behave. When fat is stripped out, something else has to step in to keep the texture palatable, and here that usually means thickeners, modified starches, or bulking agents that give the yogurt body without nourishment. The flavor profile feels thin and slightly artificial, especially in fruit varieties, because the natural creaminess that carries taste has been removed. Instead of tasting fermented and fresh, the yogurt leans flat, relying on sweetness and flavourings to keep it interesting. It fills space in your stomach, but it doesn't satisfy, which is why people often find themselves hungry again not long after. This is yogurt designed to hit numbers on a label, not to support real satiety or enjoyment. Number 14. Lindals. Lindals positions itself as a high-protein, performance-focused yogurt, but that sharp, dense texture tells you exactly how it gets there. The yogurt is aggressively strained, concentrating protein while stripping away much of the natural balance between fat, lactose, and cultures. What you're left with is thick and filling, but also slightly chalky and dry on the tongue, a common side effect of over-concentration. The flavour often feels blunt rather than rounded. Protein dominates the mouthfeel, while the fermentation notes sit quietly in the background instead of leading. For people sensitive to digestion, this kind of ultra-dense yogurt can feel heavy despite being marketed as clean and functional. Lindals isn't junk, but it's a product built for macros first and food quality second, which is why it lands on the avoid side rather than the trust list. Number 13. Longley Farm Yogurt. Longley Farm Yogurt leans heavily on its farmhouse image, and to be fair, it still feels closer to traditional dairy than most supermarket tubs. The issue isn't that it's ultra-processed, it's that the product hasn't really evolved while expectations have. The yogurt is noticeably rich and creamy, but that richness comes more from milk handling than from deep fermentation. The cultures feel mild, almost shy, which gives you smoothness without much tang or complexity. Because it's lightly fermented, the yogurt tastes pleasant, but slightly one note. You don't get that layered sourness that signals a longer, more active culture process. For some people, especially those sensitive to lactose, this can feel heavier than expected despite the natural positioning. It's not badly made, but it's a yogurt that prioritizes comfort and familiarity over depth. In a market where better fermented options exist, Longley Farm ends up feeling safe rather than genuinely impressive. Number 12. Lancashire Farm Yogurt. Lancashire Farm yogurts trade strongly on nostalgia and local pride, but the eating experience tells a more mixed story. The texture is thick and glossy, almost too polished, which suggests a focus on consistency over natural variation. That kind of uniformity usually means the process is tuned for shelf stability rather than letting the cultures fully express themselves. The flavour leans sweet and creamy, with very little natural sharpness. Even the plain varieties feel muted, as if the fermentation is intentionally restrained to appeal to the widest audience possible. That makes the yogurt easy to eat, but also easy to forget. It doesn't challenge your palate, and it doesn't deliver the freshness you expect from a brand built on farm identity. You're left with a product that looks traditional, tastes modern and softened, and sits somewhere between real, cultured dairy and dessert-style yogurt. Number 11. Rachel's Organic. Rachel's Organic leans hard into the word organic, and that label does a lot of heavy lifting for the brand. But organic certification doesn't automatically mean better fermentation or better yogurt. When you actually taste it, the cultures feel surprisingly mild. The yogurt is smooth and creamy, but there's very little natural tang, which suggests fermentation is kept deliberately gentle to maintain a crowd-pleasing flavour. That softness makes it easy to eat, but it also means the yogurt behaves more like a dairy dessert than a living cultured food. In flavoured varieties, sweetness tends to dominate early, pushing the milk and culture notes into the background. The result is a product that feels safe and polished rather than vibrant. You're paying for organic sourcing and brand trust, but the yogurt itself doesn't deliver the depth or character you'd expect. Number 10. Yo Valley. Yo Valley has one of the strongest farm-based images in the UK dairy aisle, but the yogurt itself often feels engineered to match supermarket expectations rather than farmhouse reality. The texture is extremely consistent, thick, glossy, and predictable, which usually means the process prioritizes uniformity over natural variation from batch to batch. The flavor profile is gentle to the point of being muted. Even the natural versions lack that clean, acidic edge that signals active fermentation. Instead, you get a rounded, slightly sweet dairy note that disappears quickly. This makes the yogurt very accessible, but it also makes it nutritionally and sensorially underwhelming. It's designed to offend no one, which is exactly why it ends up feeling bland. Yo Valley sells the idea of farm freshness, but the yogurt tastes like it's been smoothed down to fit mass retail shelves. Number 9. Aldi Brooklyn Yogurt. Aldi Brooklyn Yogurt exists to hit a price point, and once you taste it, that goal is obvious. The texture is thick but oddly hollow, the kind of body that comes from processing tricks rather than naturally developed cultures. It holds its shape, but it doesn't feel alive on the tongue. The flavor is where the compromises show most clearly. Plain varieties taste flat, while flavored ones rely heavily on sweetness to stay interesting. That's usually a sign that fermentation time is kept short to speed production and reduce costs. You end up with a yogurt that fills the spoon but doesn't satisfy for long. Brooklyn isn't unsafe or shocking, but it's built around efficiency, not quality. It's yogurt as a budget filler, not as a fermented food worth seeking out. Number 8. Lidl Milbona Yogurt. Milbona yogurt looks innocent enough, but once you check the label, the story gets clearer. Many flavored Milbona yogurts sit around 9 to 11 grams of sugar per 100 grams, which quietly pushes them into dessert territory. That sweetness isn't there by accident, it's doing the job that longer fermentation normally would. When fermentation is kept short to move product quickly, sugar and flavourings step in to smooth everything over. Texture-wise, Milbona is thick, but not naturally creamy. It holds together in a way that suggests starches or stabilizers are being used to keep consistency identical across massive batch runs. The cultures themselves feel muted. There's very little natural tang or acidity, which is usually the first thing you lose when production prioritizes speed over culture activity. You're left with a yogurt that looks fine, eats easily, but doesn't behave like a properly fermented food. It fills space, not appetite efficient, cheap, and forgettable. Number 7. Tesco Everyday Value Yogurt. Tesco Everyday Value Yogurt exists to hit the lowest possible price, and the compromises show immediately. The ingredient lists are short, but that's not always a win. Most everyday value flavored yogurts land in the 10 to 12 grams sugar per 100 gram range, which is high for something people often eat at breakfast. That sugar isn't just about taste, it's compensating for weak fermentation and thin milk solids. The texture is loose and slightly watery, a classic sign of low milk fat and low milk protein content. Without fat or extended culturing, the yogurt struggles to carry flavor, so sweetness does the heavy lifting. Even then, the taste fades fast, leaving a flat, mildly sour afternote instead of a clean, fermented finish. Satiety is poor too. People often feel hungry again quickly because the protein structure just isn't there. Tesco sells this as a basic staple, but nutritionally and structurally, it behaves more like a sweetened dairy filler than real yogurt. Number 6. Asda Smart Price Yogurt. Asda Smart Price Yogurt is built entirely around cost control, and the nutritional panel makes that clear. Most Smart Price flavoured yogurts sit around 11 to 13 grams of sugar per 100 grams, which is extremely high for a product often eaten as breakfast or a light snack. That level of sweetness isn't about flavor preference, it's compensating for very low milk quality inputs and minimal fermentation time. The protein content is typically low, often under 4 grams per 100 grams, which explains why the yogurt feels thin and unsatisfying despite tasting sweet. Without enough milk solids or fat, the structure collapses quickly in the mouth, leaving a watery finish. This is yogurt designed to be cheap and shelf-stable, not nourishing. It technically qualifies as yogurt, but functionally, it behaves more like sweetened milk gel than a fermented food. Number 5. Morrison's Savers Yogurt. Morrison's. Savers yogurt looks similar on the shelf to other budget tubs, but the texture gives away a different shortcut. Instead of being watery, it often feels rubbery or overset, a sign that gelling agents or milk powders are being used to force thickness without proper culturing. This kind of structure breaks oddly on the spoon, snapping instead of flowing. Sugar levels in flavored Savers yogurts usually hover around 10 to 12 grams per 100 grams, again masking weak fermentation. The flavor comes on strong, then drops off abruptly, leaving a slightly artificial aftertaste. Protein remains modest, so despite the thicker feel, satiety is still low. Morrison's markets this as a value option, but the eating experience reveals a product engineered for appearance, not digestion or balance. Number 4. Sainsbury's Stamford Street Yogurt. Stamford Street Yogurt is positioned as a basic, no-frills option, but the compromise here is fermentation itself. These yogurts are typically very mild, with little to no natural acidity, indicating extremely short culture time. Instead of tasting fresh and tangy, they taste flat, with sweetness doing most of the work. Flavored versions commonly contain around 10 to 11 grams sugar per 100 grams, while protein stays low, often below 4.5 grams per 100 grams. That imbalance explains why the yogurt feels filling for a moment, but doesn't hold you over. Even the mouthfeel fades quickly, turning chalky as the sweetness clears. Stamford Street isn't unsafe, but it's a stripped-down product where fermentation is treated as a technical requirement, not the heart of the food. You're getting calories, not culture. Number 3. M&S Everyday Yogurt. M&S. Everyday yogurt benefits from the brand's reputation, but once you look at the nutrition panel, it behaves very much like a cost-controlled product. Most flavored everyday yogurts land around 9 to 11 grams of sugar per 100 grams, which is high for a range marketed as a daily staple. That sweetness isn't balanced by strong fermentation, because the yogurt itself tastes soft and muted, with very little natural acidity. Protein content is moderate at best, usually around 4 to 5 grams per 100 grams, which explains why it doesn't keep you full for long. The texture is smooth but slightly glossy, a sign that processing is tuned for consistency rather than culture activity. It's not bad yogurt, but it's not especially alive either. You're paying for M&S reassurance, while the product itself sits closer to standard supermarket dairy than something truly cultured or nourishing. Number 2. Arla Yogurt. Arla yogurts look clean and modern, but the issue here is how diluted the fermentation feels. Many Arla flavored yogurts contain 8 to 10 grams sugar per 100 grams, which isn't extreme, but it consistently overshadows the cultures. The taste leans milky and sweet rather than tangy, suggesting fermentation is deliberately kept mild to suit a wide audience. Protein levels are average, typically around 4 to 5 grams per 100 grams, and fat is often reduced, which flattens the mouthfeel. Without fat or strong culturing to carry flavor, the yogurt relies on sweetness and flavorings to stay appealing. It goes down easily, but it doesn't deliver that satisfying, slightly sharp finish that signals a properly fermented product. Arla makes safe, mass-market yogurt, but safe doesn't mean optimal. especially if you're eating it for gut or satiety benefits. Number 1. Beautiful Kefir Yogurt. Beautiful markets itself as a gut health hero, but the product itself raises a few quiet red flags. While kefir traditionally relies on long fermentation and diverse cultures, many Beautiful flavoured varieties still contain around 7 to 9 grams sugar per 100 grams, which works against the very digestion-friendly image they promote. Sweetness dampens the natural sharpness that real kefir is known for. Texture is another clue. It's smoother and more uniform than traditionally fermented kefir, suggesting fermentation is carefully controlled rather than fully expressive. Protein remains modest, usually around 3.5 to 4 grams per 100 grams. And the drinkable consistency means satiety is low, despite the functional positioning. Beautiful isn't dangerous or fake, but it sits in an uncomfortable middle ground, not sugary dessert yogurt, yet not robustly fermented kefir either. You're buying the health story more than the biological depth of the product. But don't worry, it's not all bad news. Some yogurt brands are actually clean, simple, and made with real milk and live cultures. Starting with number 10, the Estate Dairy Yogurt. The Estate Dairy stands out because it behaves like real yogurt should. The ingredient lists are short, and the flavour profile tells you fermentation wasn't rushed. Even the plain varieties carry a gentle tang, a sign of longer culture time rather than sweetness doing the work. Sugar levels in flavoured options are typically lower than mass market averages, often staying closer to 5 to 7 grams per 100 grams, which keeps them firmly out of dessert territory. Protein content is naturally balanced, usually around 5 grams per 100 grams, giving the yogurt real staying power without artificial thickening. The texture flows rather than snaps, showing the structure comes from milk proteins and cultures, not stabilizers. This is yogurt made to taste like fermented dairy, not engineered spoon food. Number 9. The Ethical Dairy Yogurt. The ethical dairy doesn't just talk about animal welfare. It shows up in the product itself. The yogurt has a fuller mouthfeel, which usually comes from higher quality milk solids, rather than processing tricks. Fermentation is noticeable, but not aggressive, giving a clean acidity that fades naturally instead of turning chalky. Most varieties avoid excessive sweetness, keeping sugars restrained and letting the milk do the work. Protein sits comfortably in the 5 to 6 grams per 100 grams range, which explains why it feels more satisfying than standard supermarket tubs. You're not just buying ethics here. You're getting yogurt that behaves like a properly cultured food from start to finish. Number 8. Fen Farm Dairy Yogurt. Fen Farm Dairy Yogurt feels unapologetically traditional. The texture is rich but not glossy, a sign that it's built from whole milk and fermentation, not mechanical smoothing. When you taste it, the acidity develops slowly, which usually means cultures were allowed enough time to work instead of being cut short for efficiency. Sugar levels are naturally low in plain varieties, and even flavoured options tend to stay modest, avoiding the sharp sweetness spike common in supermarket brands. The protein structure feels robust, giving a creamy but grounded mouthfeel. This is yogurt that prioritizes milk quality first, not shelf uniformity. Number 7. High-wheeled dairy yogurt. High-wheeled dairy yogurt stands out for its balance. It's creamy without feeling heavy, and tangy without being sharp, which usually points to carefully managed fermentation temperatures and timing. The yogurt breaks cleanly on the spoon, not rubbery or watery, showing the structure comes from real culturing. Protein content is solid, generally around 5 grams per 100 grams, and sweetness is kept restrained. Even flavoured versions don't overpower the base yogurt. What you taste here is control in the right places, not shortcuts. It's a yogurt that feels calm, complete, and thoughtfully made. Number 6. Hurdle Makers Yogurt. Hurdle Maker's yogurt feels handcrafted in the best way. The texture has natural variation, not the perfectly polished look of industrial dairy. That variation is usually a sign that batches aren't aggressively standardized, allowing the cultures to behave naturally. The flavor has depth, mild at first, then gently tangy, which points to active fermentation rather than sugar masking. Protein levels are respectable, and the yogurt leaves you feeling satisfied instead of hungry again an hour later. It's not flashy, but it's honest, and that honesty shows up clearly on the spoon. Number 5. Lie Cross Farm Yogurt. Lie Cross Farm Yogurt delivers exactly what people expect from a farm-based dairy product. Richness without heaviness, and flavor without excess sweetness. The yogurt has a dense but smooth body, typically achieved through good milk solids and controlled fermentation, not additives. Plain varieties keep sugars naturally low, while flavored options avoid pushing beyond sensible ranges. Protein sits around 5 to 6 grams per 100 grams, giving real satiety. The finish is clean, slightly tangy, and doesn't linger artificially. This is yogurt that feels nourishing rather than manipulated, a solid upgrade from mass-market brands. Number 4. The Dorset Dairy Co. Yogurt. The Dorset Dairy Co. Yogurt feels deliberately small-scale, and that shows up immediately in the flavor. The fermentation has a gentle but noticeable tang, which tells you the cultures were given enough time to work instead of being rushed for volume. The texture is creamy without being glossy, a strong sign that thickness comes from milk proteins and fat, not stabilizers. Sugar levels in flavored options are generally restrained, staying closer to 5 to 7 grams per 100 grams, which keeps the yogurt firmly in food territory rather than dessert. Protein content sits comfortably around 5 grams per 100 grams, giving it real staying power. This is yogurt that tastes like it was made to be eaten slowly, not engineered to survive endless shelf handling. Number 3. Lowfields Farm Yogurt. Lowfields Farm Yogurt stands out because it lets the milk lead. The flavor is clean and rounded, with a natural acidity that builds gradually, a classic sign of proper culturing rather than sweetness masking. The yogurt doesn't snap or wobble unnaturally. It flows, showing that the structure comes from fermentation, not forced setting. Plain varieties are naturally low in sugar, while flavored versions avoid heavy-handed additions. Protein is typically around 5 to 6 grams per 100 grams, which explains why it feels more filling than most supermarket yogurts. What makes Lowfields special is restraint. Nothing is pushed too far, and that balance makes it easier to digest and enjoy regularly. Number 2. Village Dairy Yogurt. Village Dairy Yogurt feels practical and honest. The texture is firm but not rubbery, suggesting a well-managed fermentation temperature rather than aggressive thickening. When you taste it, the acidity is clear but smooth, not sharp or chalky, which points to stable, active cultures. Sugar content in flavored options is moderate and doesn't overwhelm the base yogurt. Protein levels usually sit near 5 grams per 100 grams, giving decent satiety without heaviness. This is the kind of yogurt that works well as a daily staple. Reliable fermentation, clean finish, and no unnecessary processing tricks trying to impress you. Number 1. Graham's Dairy Yogurt. Graham's Dairy Yogurt earns its spot at the top because it consistently balances milk quality, fermentation, and nutrition. The yogurt has a rich but natural mouthfeel, which comes from high-quality milk solids rather than artificial thickening. The tang is present and clean, a sign that fermentation isn't rushed or dulled to suit mass appeal. Sugar levels in flavored varieties are kept sensible, while plain options stay naturally low. Protein content is strong, typically around 5 to 6 grams per 100 grams, which helps with satiety and overall balance. What really sets Graham's apart is consistency. Bag after bag, the yogurt behaves the same way. Fresh, cultured, and satisfying. It feels like yogurt made with confidence rather than compromise.